For most of his career, James Harrison hated Tom Brady's guts and wanted to end his night every time they lined up. Then Harrison put on a Patriots jersey late in his career, played next to the guy, and walked away talking about him like a brother.
To be honest with you, listen, I wanted to hate this dude. Like the whole time I'm playing in Pittsburgh, you know, we got Garrett. He came over. And I'm like, man, what's up with Tom Brady? It's like, oh man, he's a great guy. I'm like, stop lying.
That's not normal. Teammates don't usually flip on a quarterback like that. And here's the thing, guys would have taken a bullet for Tom Brady. Meanwhile, plenty of Aaron Rodgers' former teammates couldn't wait for him to get out of Green Bay and the Jets, and I'm sure soon enough we'll hear the same thing once he retires from the Steelers. So we're going over the culture, personality gap, and how two very different draft nights shaped how two of the best quarterbacks we've ever seen play turned into completely different leaders. Starting in 2001, when a 6th-round nobody got handed the keys to a franchise and nobody expected him to keep them. Drew Bledsoe was the guy for New England. He was the highest paid quarterback in the NFL history at that time, and he was a franchise quarterback that the Patriots had built their whole identity around. Then Mo Lewis from the Jets hit him so hard that Bledsoe needed emergency surgery for internal bleeding. If he didn't go to the hospital, he could have died on a football field. In steps Tom Brady, a 6th-round, 199th pick who spent his rookie year as a 4th-string quarterback just trying to make the roster. Now he's a starter, and by any modern measuring stick, his numbers that year weren't anything special. His completion percentage was in the low 60s, not exactly the kind of numbers that kept defenses up at night. But here's where it gets interesting. Drew Bledsoe got healthy and wanted his job back. Bill Belichick looked at the locker room full of veterans who loved Bledsoe, who had every reason to want the highest paid quarterback under center, and Belichick didn't blink. He stuck with Tom Brady. That decision could have blown up the locker room. Veterans could have mutinied or waited for him to fail so the natural order got restored. Instead, the opposite happened. Tom's approach in meetings and in practice earned buy-in fast. He earned it by acting like he hadn't earned anything yet, rather than demanding respect. Think about what a lot of young quarterbacks do the second they get a chance. They start acting like the guy. Nicer car, more attitude in the huddle. Brady did the complete opposite. He was still splitting rent with his roommates, driving an old beat-up truck, and he was walking into that building like a guy still fighting for a roster spot, not like a guy who had just taken over the offense for a franchise. That's where the dude's dude reputation started forming, and it never really left him. You hear it from Gronk and from Edelman, guys who came in years later and got the same treatment rookies always get from him. Brutally honest and never entitled. He'd run the same sprints everybody else ran in the summer heat, and then he'd want one more. Not because he was trying to prove something to the cameras, there were no cameras, because that's exactly who he was. This is the seed of everything that comes later in his career. A guy who had to earn a starting job from a hospital bed's worth of bad luck for somebody else, so he never stopped acting like he had to earn it, every year and every play. Now hold that thought, because Aaron Rodgers walked into the league from a completely different door. Where Brady had nothing given to him, Rodgers had almost everything expected of him and then didn't get it. On national television in front of everybody, sliding down in the draft. That collision of expectation and reality is going to matter a lot more than people think. Now fast forward to the 2016 Super Bowl, Atlanta jumps out to a 28-3 lead, and that's not just a lead, man, that's total control. Most quarterbacks at that point in time start trying to play the blame game, start figuring out who they can actually blame because it's not their fault in their head before the game is even over. But that's not what Tom did. And the reason why it tells you everything about what Tom Brady had built over 16 years in New England at that point. Everybody on that sideline remembers the same thing, calm. Not the fake calm a guy puts on for the cameras, genuinely calm. He kept coaching guys up between series, still talking through what he was reading from the defense. Panic spreads fast. It's contagious, and one finger-pointing session and the whole operation unravels. Brady refused to let that happen, and he refused simply by not doing it himself. Logan Ryan brings this up all the time. He tells a story about being down 25 points in that game and remembering just to stay calm because Tom Brady's your quarterback. That's not a guy polishing a highlight reel years after the fact. That's a real belief system built over years of watching this man operate. And even the opponents on the other sideline notice the same thing. There's a quote that gets repeated for a reason. He never had that look. You know the look. The I don't want to be here look. The look a quarterback gets when the game is slipping away and part of him has already checked out. Brady never gave that off. Not down 25, not a player in his late 30s and his 7th Super Bowl. And that changes how a locker room fights for you. Because the team can feel when their leader has quit on the inside, even if he hasn't said a word. But the calm is only half the story. The comeback happens because of preparation, not because a guy stayed cool and got lucky. This is a quarterback famous for pointing out entire defenses from film study, identifying tendencies other people have missed. When the team actually had a bye week, 3 days off, most players use that time to rest. Brady sent the offense a group chat with cut-ups of the next opponent. Here's what their corner does with his hips. Here's how their safety cheats before the snap. While everybody else rested, he was still working, and that work is what shows up in the fourth quarter when you need 25 points in 20 minutes. And that type of dedication always gains respect, even from those you don't expect. Now here's where the story gets bigger than just the teammates buying in. The opponents did as well. That's a rare thing. Guys who spent years trying to physically hurt someone don't usually flip the script once they're wearing the same colors, but it kept happening around Brady over and over, and that pattern is too big to be a coincidence. James Harrison's the clearest example. Before he ever put on a Patriots jersey, Harrison hated Brady with the Steelers. He hit him as hard as anybody in the league ever hit him across an entire career, and he made no secret about wanting to end his night early. This went beyond trash talk. This was a guy who built part of his reputation on being violent towards the quarterback standing across from him. So James signs with New England late in his career, gets to actually be in the building with the guy, and the entire tune changes. He starts talking about Brady as the most competitive teammate he's ever been around. The most competitive, which from a guy who made his living hitting quarterbacks is about as high as a compliment you can get. Respect for the preparation. Respect for how Brady treated everyone in that locker room the exact same way, whether you were a Pro Bowler or a guy fighting for a roster spot. And James isn't a one-off. This pattern shows up across dozens of players who used to talk trash about Brady, who genuinely wanted to see him fail and then got traded to New England or later to Tampa and came out the other side gushing about him. Guys who had every professional reason to keep hating him instead of actually loving him, and instead, they chose to love him. Now think about how rare that actually is on the other side of this comparison. You don't hear the same story shape up around Aaron Rodgers. Former opponents don't typically describe playing alongside him and having some switch flip where suspicion turned into admiration. Former teammates don't usually describe a slow thaw into deep respect the way Harrison did. This section isn't about proving Brady was universally loved from day one, because he wasn't. It's about proving something more specific. Whatever he was doing in that building wasn't fake locker room politics or a media-friendly performance. It was real enough to convert people who had every reason in the world to keep on hating him. That same relentless likability carried over to Tampa, at age 43 with a roster full of guys who had never spent a single day with him. Different jersey and different building, but the same result. Brady leaving at age 43 to go to Tampa, nobody expected it to work out how it did. This wasn't a guy leaving in his prime for a better situation. He was leaving the only organization he ever known, the only building and the only voices in those meeting rooms for full 2 decades. And he walked away from it all into a locker room full of strangers. Guys who'd competed against him, sure, but never had spent a single day with him. And within months, the roster started rearranging itself around him. Gronk is the easiest example to point to. He'd retired, his body was broken down, and he looked done entirely with football. Then Brady called him, and Gronk unretired. Not because Tampa was some genius scheme fit, or because the money was life-changing, but because Brady asked. That's loyalty following a guy you can't buy with a contract. The Bucs players who were already there described something specific about meeting Brady for the first time. It wasn't starstruck energy, even though this was the 6-time champion walking into their meeting room. It was more that his tone changed the entire room itself. The way he talked in meetings and how he shifted how everybody approached practice. Nobody had to tell them to lock in, they did because he did. Trust doesn't build itself off of big speeches. It builds off small, weirdly specific details. Brady personally staying after practice to coach up receivers on their releases. Guys who'd been in the league for years suddenly getting quarterback level attention on footwork. Calling up his center about sweat and towels because wet hands lead to bad snaps and bad snaps lead to bad games. Not glamorous at all. But that's a guy who cared enough to think about somebody else's hands. Then you get the moment that tells you everything. A rookie 4th-string running back, a guy who barely sniffed the field all season, gets his first NFL touchdown thrown to him by Tom Brady. Brady's response wasn't a fist bump for the cameras. He looked at the kid and yelled, "I love you, Sneak." That's not a guy trying to protect his image. That's a guy who genuinely was excited for his teammate. So here's the thread running through all of it. 7 rings never made Brady act like he was above anybody in those buildings. Not the practice squad guy, not the 4th-string running back, not the center worried about his grip. And that's exactly what turned a roster full of strangers into a team playing playoff level football together within a matter of months, year in, year out. That kind of leadership you rarely hear described the same way in Green Bay, or later with the Jets, let alone with the Steelers. When reporters ask Rodgers' former teammates about him, the stories don't sound like this really at all. Leadership isn't about what a guy can say in front of a podium full of an audience. It's about if the people in the building actually trust what the guy is saying behind closed doors. And this is where the Rodgers story takes a sharp turn. Go back to 2021. Aaron tells reporters he's been immunized, not vaccinated. A word chosen carefully enough that it sounded like an answer without actually being one. Weeks later, he tests positive for COVID, and it comes out he was never vaccinated at all. So now he owes an explanation, and the explanation he gives on the Pat McAfee show runs long. He talks about the woke mob. He talks about a witch hunt happening across the league. He talks about feeling like cancel culture casket was about to get its final nail. Almost none of that is about the team he plays for. Almost none of it addresses the fact that his backup, a guy who hadn't taken an NFL snap yet, was about to start a game because of a decision Rodgers made and then wasn't upfront about. But it's not really about vaccines. It's about a pattern, and that pattern keeps showing up throughout the rest of his career. Fast forward to 2024 with the Jets. Aaron Rodgers shows an interception in a big spot, and afterward he tells reporters Mike Williams ran the wrong route. Names him on the record in prime time. Then in 2025 with the Steelers, he does the same move again. This time without naming names, telling reporters, when I check to a route, run the right route. Everybody in that locker room knows exactly who he's talking about, even if the cameras don't. The mechanism that makes it actually sting isn't that Rodgers is wrong about the football. He's usually right about the football. But guys like Ryan Fitzpatrick have pointed out something specific. Aaron rarely seems to shoulder blame himself with that same public voice. The standard he holds his receivers to in front of reporters isn't the standard he holds himself to when he's the one who threw the ball in a bad spot. Then you have the Caller article. This isn't some hit piece built on rumors. It's on the record quotes from his own receivers about what it's actually like learning his offense. Young guys like Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson at that time were talking about how brutal those hand signal meetings could be. Sessions where Aaron would pull old signals from year-old offenses and expect rookies to just know them. Jordan Love, his own backup at the time, confirmed it too. Nobody looked forward to those meetings. That's not one disgruntled ex-teammate venting. That was the current locker room at the time, on the record saying the same thing. And that's the part people miss when they treat this as one bad season or one bad quote about vaccines. This is a pattern across 3 different organizations in 2 decades: Green Bay, New York, and Pittsburgh. Different rosters and the same story repeating itself. And that repetition shapes how a locker room ends up feeling about the guy under center. If you want the clearest teammate testimony, it comes from Greg Jennings. This isn't some guy who watched out of the league after 2 years and got bitter from watching from the couch. Jennings caught passes from Rodgers during the best stretch of his career, made a Pro Bowl, caught 2 touchdowns in a Super Bowl with the guy throwing him the ball. And on the record, years later, Greg said it plainly: playing with Rodgers was hard. That comment set off an actual back and forth on ESPN's First Take. Jennings sat there and made his case. The Packers receivers as a group didn't get the credit they deserve for making that offense go. And then he said something sharper than that. He said Rodgers never fought for him the way Jennings fought for Rodgers on the field. That wasn't a stats complaint. That was a loyalty complaint, coming from a guy who could easily just talk about the rings and move on. Here's a detail that actually hurts though. The one that sticks with you after the segment ends. Greg said his teammates never heard Aaron say he wanted Greg to be there. Not once. Contract situations are business, everybody gets that. But there's a difference between a business decision happening quietly in a front office and a franchise quarterback never once speaking up for a guy who helped him win a championship. Silence there is its own kind of statement. That silence connects to something people around that Packers locker room have described for years: a clique, an inner circle, his guys. Insiders describe it as a real thing, not a rumor, where certain players got a different level of access and warmth from Rodgers, and everybody else operated on a completely different tier. Compare that to what we already know about Brady's approach in Tampa, treating a rookie 4th-string running back with the same energy he gave a 6-time Pro Bowler. Brady's locker room didn't have tiers like that, but Rodgers did, according to the people who actually lived through it. And Jennings isn't out torching the guy for content. He's careful about it, almost to a fault. He still calls Rodgers a great quarterback, still says nice things about his talent whenever he's asked, but he draws a hard line between the talent and how it actually felt to be in that building with him. Those are 2 separate conversations. That's really the sharpest contrast in this entire video. Nobody argues who could sling it better. Talent was never the debate with either one of these guys. The debate is loyalty, and that's exactly where the 2 of them split completely apart. Now let's talk about where this comes from, because both of these guys came into the league from completely different viewpoints. Starting with the numbers, Brady went 199th overall, 6th round, the 7th quarterback taken in the entire draft. That tells you how little anybody thought of him coming in. He was a Campard who had to fight a healthy Bledsoe just to get reps, let alone throw for a franchise. Rodgers is the opposite story. Heading into his draft, he was supposed to go number 1 overall. Everybody had him at the top of the board, and instead, team after team passed on him. And the camera stayed locked in on his face the entire time, live on national TV. As he dropped and dropped and dropped, Green Bay finally took him at pick 24. Here's a theory worth sitting with. It's not gospel, but just a theory. A guy who had nothing given to him, who had to fight from pick 199 just to be in the conversation, ends up spending the next 2 decades still playing like he's got something to prove to everybody in the building, not just the guy on the sideline. And here's the other side of that same coin. A guy who was promised a world, who was supposed to be the #1 overall pick, and then got humiliated on live TV instead, carries that resentment into every slight for the rest of his career. Every slight, real or perceived, stacking on top of the first one. Right down to the Packers drafting Jordan Love years later without ever picking up the phone to give him a heads up, which I do feel like was a slight. That connects directly to the standoff that followed. In that press conference, Rodgers named a dozen former teammates, one by one, listing off guys he felt the front office had mishandled on their way out the door. It's not a random rant. That's a guy still processing a wound that traces all the way back to a night in 2005, when the league told him in front of everybody that he wasn't who he thought he was. Now let's keep this balance. It's a real thread, but not a total explanation for either guy. Draft night doesn't excuse everything that followed. Both of these men are complicated, shaped by 100 different things beyond one night on a stage, but it's hard to hear stories of both careers and not see the shadow of that night still sitting there. Now here's the thing, talent gets you drafted, but how you treat the practice squad guy actually decides whether anyone follows you into a fight. So there you have it. Watch this next video if you haven't already and subscribe if you're new. Thanks for watching.